discuss this. All right,
We're live.
we're live. This is exciting. So, welcome them to the panel. Fantasy is for kids too. We have six excellent authors that I am so looking forward to being able to talk with. We have Jeffrey, Jamie, Troy, Dames, Sean, and Chris. But I'm going to let them introduce themselves and share some upcoming any of their upcoming books that they have. So we'll start with Jeffrey.
Hi, guys. I'm Jeffrey Falconlow, and I'm primarily known for the Slime Verse, which starts with the Slime Dungeon and which is kid friendly. Uh, my upcoming book is Hungry Dungeon in the same universe, and that is kid friendly. In fact, it's full of recipes along with the fantasy, so you can enjoy that.
Hi, I'm Jamie, or JD Jorgensen's my author name. Um, I write the Omega Online series, which is kid friendly, and I'm working on the third book right now in that series. My second one just came out in the last couple months, and then I have a not kid friendly series that I'm going to be releasing on Royal Road called Dungeon Mercenary, which is going to be my take
Mm-hmm.
on the dungeon core. Um, so
Yay. Okay.
Hey, I'm Troy. I do the Skyrealms online and Battlegrounds online, and Jeff the Game Master. None of them are really geared for kids, but they are safe enough. I got when I started writing, I have two daughters, 9 and 7. I'm like, I gotta do something for my kids, so that's what led to doing that. And this is coming out in this first week of December on schedule.
Nice.
So
Exciting.
yes, so that's me.
All right, I'm Dames Handsome. Uh, I guess my big series right now is Buy Mort, but don't share that with kids. It's not for them. The kid stuff is Fairy Nights, and I'll put one of these up here or two because I already have them here. The Fairy Nights books. This is, I'd say it's gamelets because it definitely follows game rules, but it's not inside the game. And it's a series entirely inspired by an RPG that I made for my wife and for my son that we played together. And the first book is almost exactly what happened, and then after that, it kind of spun off from there. Fun series, definitely check it out. All right, and on to Sean.
Thanks, James. Hi, I'm Sean Fletcher. I write YA fantasy and middle grade fantasy. My YA is certainly kid friendly. I would say probably starting at 11, wouldn't go much younger than that. But I do have middle grade fantasy as well. I've been trying to get traditionally published in that respect for a little while. So my current book, which is about a girl raised by death in the land of monsters, is out with agents at the moment. I've got some YA series, Legacy of Dragons, Heir of Dragons, Mage's Apprentice, Darkness Within, all pretty kid friendly, and they're a lot of fun, full of fantasy.
Hi guys, I'm Chris. I write under CM Carney. My biggest series is The Realms, which I probably wouldn't give to most younger kids. It's swearing and that kind of stuff. I have a series called The Quintessence, which is kind of ya-ish cultivation. And my dog is deciding to say hi. And I'm currently working on middle grade. I don't know if you can see that piece of paper that I printed the cover up because I don't have the book yet.
Oh, it's a beautiful paper.
Beautiful.
Fancy paper. It's what we're calling it is middle grade Arthurian superhero lit RPG. It's a series based on an idea that my writing partner and I came up with 21 years ago when we worked for an animation company. Never got to make it into a cartoon, so we're going to make it into a series of books, and then hopefully that will lead to making it into a cartoon. But that's definitely aimed at like the 8 to 12, 14 age kind of group. So excited about that. That'll be out next year at some time. Not quite sure yet because we're going to wait till we have all three in the first trilogy done, and then we're going to release them. So,
Well, that's a good way of doing it.
yeah.
All right. So we'll move forward. So let's just start right at the beginning. How how do we make fantasy more accessible for kids?
Compared to when I started and getting into it, I think it's a lot easier now. 'Cause, I mean, the stuff I watch with my daughters is basically, Princess Sophia the First. There is a fantasy series, Disney supplied fantasy series for kids. My daughters absolutely love that show. I've seen every episode of that about 20 times. I know that show in and out. It's very scary. But I mean, then there's, Del Toro did Troll Hunters. It's another kid one. Dragon Riders. It's a lot more accessible now than when I was a kid, I would say.
I was kind of weird. I think to me, it's almost easy. Like kids love magic and make believe and make stuff already, so just expose them to it. I think is the thing. That's one of the reasons I wanted to write this was because my first attempt at writing professionally was that animation company, and it was all stuff for kids. So like we've got 20 different properties that we could eventually bring to market if we had time to write them. If this does well, that might be my new focus. I'll probably go back to the adult stuff here and there because I might go crazy otherwise. But I think that wonder that you have to have to write fantasy is kind of us being kids already. So I think it's simple. You just take some of the gore, the swearing, and all of the stuff, other adult stuff out, and it's pretty easy to make it.
Honestly, I would say that just making fantasy just by default is kind of kid friendly because adults' fantasies are typically things like, man, I wish I still got paid and didn't have to go to work.
A full night's rest.
Yeah. Kid fantasies are, I pick up a stick and now I have a sword in my hand.
Or everything's a lightsaber.
Yeah, or it depends on your type of fantasy, right? So I think that it's more of a conscious effort to make fantasy adult in a sense, or rather, the adult fantasy is different from YA fantasy in what I would call just complexity, not necessarily the narrative, but rather the big words for instance, or the deeper topics of responsibility. I think like how does your actions and role in the world impact those around you in society? Where kid fantasies is you're the hero and you go defeat the dragon. No, you didn't cause an economic recession.
Right?
I
Well,
think for a lot of kids, fantasy, like any book, but even though it is fantasy, it's still including things that kids deal with and issues that they have in a more kid-friendly way. So you're not negating that, but you're also just including more fun elements that can really draw them in. But yeah, like Troy was saying, especially years ago, like even not too long ago, there wasn't as much fantasy as there now. I think it's now become cool, I guess, in a way to be nerdy, and that's just kind of created this boom and explosion of it, which is fantastic. So it is more accessible and in more accessible mediums than ever before. It's just continuing to capitalize on that.
What about you, Jamie?
Yeah, I have a 13-year-old daughter. So when I wrote my first book, it kind of started out not so kid-friendly. But I kind of kept her in mind when I was writing it and kind of pulled back on that. And I found that it actually flowed better that way anyways, because my protagonist is 17 and he's kind of sheltered life anyways. So I found that it flowed way better, and it was a better story by me pulling off, because it started to get, mine's post-apocalyptic, and it started getting a lot darker than I was intending. So I was able to pull back, and I think I lightened up the story and added a little bit more, actually added more humor by removing that stuff. So I cleaned it up, and there's still, it touches on subjects occasionally, but doesn't delve into them. So like my 13-year-old daughter, if I could ever get her to read it, because she doesn't like science fiction, she likes fantasy, pure fantasy. Yeah, she's a pure fantasy kid. So she's picked up my book a couple times, and she'll read a little bit, and she'll be like, I just don't like the world that is starting out in, this dystopian world. But yeah, it's I just kind of keep her in mind, and then I also have that outlet, like the other stuff I write. I have that outlet to where I can get the more mature themes. So I think that's also important that you have that, whether it be you know, what you're into, like personally, or you know, having another outlet for writing.
And I think the hardest thing about writing for the kids, getting them into fantasy, is that there's such a broad spectrum. Like my books were actually written for the younger age, written for my son, who at the time was 10 years old. So it was written in that 7 to 10 range, and that's a very different audience from the 11 to 14, say. Um, yeah, you focus a lot more on making things goofy and silly, and you focus a lot more on the oomph factor. When something awesome happens, it has to be awesome for that age category. Pulling the sword from the stone isn't that cool to the 7-year-old, but pulling the sword, and becoming king of England, I should say, but pulling the sword from the stone and then getting the power to turn purple, that's amazing.
That is awesome. So we had a really good question from Jesse Garney on Facebook. What rules do you have to follow to keep your work young adult and not adult? And we'll start with Jamie on that one.
As far as the rules, I mean, I cleaned up the language. Like sometimes when you're writing and you're in a group, especially when you're in a long group, I find that your language, your voice starts to come out a little bit more flowing freely. I was a military background, and so I go back and forth. Like I used to when I was in the military, I was, terrible potty mouth. Yeah, to keep it clean. But at home, like growing up, I lived in a household that there was like no swearing. I think I heard my parents cuss a handful of times, maybe 5 total. So it's like kind of a very religious household. But when I get in like that groove, sometimes that can come out, and just that stream of consciousness. And they're just keeping that and looking at and saying, hey, is this necessary? Does this drive the plot of my story at all? And it doesn't. It never does. When you're writing a more mature themed, so maybe it does. That drive the plot, or at least making it true to the character. It might be important, but it's not if you're necessarily working with a 17-year-old protagonist. So if you have a young protagonist, then it makes it naturally a lot easier, because I was not 17 when I was in the military. So I think back to what I was saying when I was not in the military. And apart from dialogue, it's just much easier when you're talking about the exposition part of it, because that's not usually where it's coming out. It's coming out in the dialogue. So
I interrupted the previous one. I apologize. So go ahead.
Jeffrey,
I'm sorry.
that's you.
Is that me?
We had someone jump in, and I interrupted them, and I apologize.
Here, I'll jump in then.
Okay, sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'll break the tension. I'm a pretty firm believer that YA, between YA and adult, is not so much a genre as it is just an age group. I think you can tackle very dark, very complex, very deep subject matter. It's about how it's approached, though. You're probably not going to find a very graphic and upsetting, say like, scene on YA that you would in adult, but that can still be there. It can still influence the story. As far as and like Jamie was saying, I agree. It's not that you can't have swearing and violence and sex and YA. It's that, is it appropriate for the story? And I would argue that in a lot of there's a very big difference between a YA fantasy and the amount of violence, swearing, sex versus a very gritty, real contemporary about, say, like living in the inner city. That's going to have a very different stylistic tone, feel, and expectations of what readers expect. Like if you're having a kid who's grown up on the streets saying like, golly gosh darn it, like that's not going to feel real to them. But at the same time, you don't have to have a character in a fantasy that's just super graphic or vulgar all the time. So the rules really are going to just be determined by the kind of story you're telling, the kind of genre you're writing in. But then, yeah, don't shy away. There's some very deep, complex graphic books for YA, and if that fits what you're writing, and it fits the audience you're going for, then go for it. And then if you do step over the line and you have beta readers and editors, they'll probably tell you. And if you go beyond that, the readers will probably tell you.
Oh yeah. Let's go to Chris on this one.
I think to me, like when I've written stuff for the Realms, I kind of have a couple of the characters that are voices that are very much the way I kind of think. So that's an easy thing. So for the kid version, if I find myself wanting to use, I don't know, some word would be a curse word, I either make up something kid-friendly stupid. Like I had a joke in this Nightman and Page book where the mom was complaining to the main character that she was basically being mean to her brother, and she's saying but, and the little brother snickers and says, "You said but." You know, 8. So I think, I don't know if it's remembering my own stupidity as a kid, or I haven't been around that many. I have a 12-year-old stepdaughter. She shies away from any bad language, so she's definitely not the source of that. But I think it's just dig in your imagination and make sure that you're not, like Sean said, you don't step over that line. And there's going to be different lines for different age groups, obviously. But it's almost been, in some ways, easier to write the kid stuff because you don't have to get that gritty, realistic dialogue. It's meant to be goofy and funny and just tell the story, make the kids laugh. You don't have to say, like, well, no one would say that in real life. Or, that's not how somebody would act. I mean, it's kids' fantasy. You're not supposed to. They're sick of real life. They see it at school all day. They want to do something funny and silly.
Yeah.
Or they see it on TikTok.
Oh my gosh.
Or TikTok.
Yeah, Mike, I was not on that side.
About that thing.
Yeah, the reader's like, it's not real. Yeah, that's why it's called a fantasy.
Yeah, I always find it funny when people are like, well, that's not realistic.
You know what?
You are
If-
correct. That means I did my job right.
Yeah, they
If it
wouldn't
were
do this in
goblins,
real
it
life.
wouldn't be TikTok. It'd be Click Clack.
I had a review once talking about spear combat in one of my books, and like you do realize that they're using magic in the middle of their combat, so of course it's not right. It's not magic,
How dare your epic battle with a dragon be unrealistic?
right?
I know.
Where did you draw your
Oh no, I used the spear wrong. He's using magic powers with it. It doesn't normally shoot lightning.
Okay, I'd make a joke that somebody needs to flip on their glasses and talks like a snobby nerd, but we're already all wearing glasses.
Yeah, put 'em on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
normally I don't
goodness.
wear them, but to go to
Actually-
read anything, I gotta.
Oh, goodness.
Well, I was gonna say with voices, character voices, I get to cheat a bit because I have the academy here, and I have students of all ages. Between that and between the university, so anytime I need someone of whatever age, I just think of various students and I just use their voice. And I wanted to show something because this is kind of I like this a lot, and the student in question likes it too. One of my students was encapsulated here to show the picture. That's her. That's Sumin Lee, and she's actually writing a book now, which is really cool.
Oh, good for
That's
you.
awesome.
Yeah, but yeah, I take various students like her, and I try to think, okay, based on what I know of them in the class, their personalities and stuff, what would they say and how would they act? Because I can tell you right now, in my classroom, they don't swear, which definitely helps with that element of it, right?
I just want to jump in because I've heard this a lot, like in the young adult realm. Not every young adult, if you've actually been around actual teens, act like the ones on Euphoria and a lot of these like other shows. If you interact with actual teens for any length of time or think back to your own childhood,
goodness.
teenagers,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, high school is boring. Even the bullying is usually boring.
I went to an all-guys Catholic high school. Mine was even more boring.
of the bullying.
Euphoria.
Please.
Euphoria is the one that TikTok did, right? They had that whole meme where it's like, get ready for school. Is that right?
I'm sure it is. I have not been on TikTok.
We're showing our age, guys.
I'm trying to make
Drop that one. because that one and stays.
I don't understand
That's
TikTok.
definitely
My
definitely
daughter
young
uses
adult.
it or watches stuff on. I'm like, what is this? Why?
I know,
Watch a
like
real show.
crazy.
Yeah,
All right. Next, let's go to the next question.
Yeah. So Steve Campbell asked this, and I really love it. How do you market kids' books when it's the parents who are actually going to buy them?
Oh, well, that's
question.
really easy. You see, you make it pretty and shiny for the kids to say, "Mommy, mommy, I want it." And then when the parents actually, like squint and look at it, you have all the things that parents like to see that the kids just like gloss over because it's like black, right? Your cover, it's all colorful and shiny, and then your description is like, "Hi, parents, this is the perfect product for your kid."
And from myself, I buy a ton of books for my daughters, and it's the same reasoning and same marketing that I do for books I read for myself. The cover, the title, and then you get into the blurb and start reading about it. And a lot of times it is really the cover. I'll look and this looks kind of interesting, and kind of start reading into it more. And she probably wouldn't like this. No, she'll like this. And I strike out now and then, but they got a lot of books that they'll read eventually, hopefully.
I mean, I've heard a lot of things about, it's really hard to market to the kids. And it's like, I think what you're both saying is you're not really marketing to the kid directly necessary. If you're in a bookstore, obviously you can go up and go, the kid will run up and see the pretty cover. But you're marketing to the parents of the kids. Or you've heard, like, you've read way too much in this subject over the last year. And it was like, get the grandmas and the moms and you're golden. And I think that might be right. I mean, I haven't done it yet. But I know my mom buys books for she loves buying books for the kids, kind of thing. And
Oh yeah.
and my wife, actually, I tend to usually go with buy the books for the stepdaughter because I'm more immersed in them than she is. But I think if you can get the parents and they know what their kids like enough, and you can tell them that that's what this is, then that's pretty much all you got to do. I don't think it's complicated as some people like to think it is, maybe.
Yeah.
I think with kids marketing too, the in-person elements is a lot more important than it is for the adult one.
Yeah.
And getting to those conventions or getting events set up, signings, all that stuff. I know in my case, like with the Fairy Nights series, those books are way more popular in Korea than in the US. And I think a lot of that has to do with I was able to visit places and actually show those books off here.
Okay.
In the US, it's all been just online advertising, and it's
Yeah.
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 I'm starting to. I think it's like the local craft shows and those kind of things where
Yes.
the parents show up is more vital for the kids stuff than it is. Like I'm thinking, I haven't done any my local town has like 3 or 4 craft fairs a year. I haven't done any of them with my normal books because that's not where the market is. But I'm going to be going once I have a couple of the kid books out there because, with grandmothers, the mothers, they're wandering around and catch their eye and like, hey, your kids are going to like this, and they'll grab them.
It's funny for my YA because it's self-published. My readers are actually adults, and that's because the way I advertise, I can only reach adults. I'm not going to actually run ads to kids, but you can. Yeah, that just has like a creepy connotation to it. But you can run ads.
Sounds like a legal mess too.
Yeah, it sure does. Facebook's already in enough trouble. They don't need any more.
No, absolutely not.
Hi,
But
little
that's why-
Timmy, I have something perfect for you.
Yeah, but that's why I try to get my middle grade traditionally published, just because they do have those avenues where what the gatekeepers are, and those are the librarians, the teachers,
Scholastic.
the parents,
Right.
and like James was saying, and Troy was saying, it gets down to those personal events, library visits, school visits, conventions, all that, and getting out in person. And I mean, you can actually try to run Facebook ads to the parents and just make the ad very clear, like, yo, might not be for you, but your kids will love it, and try it that way.
I apologize. I'm not trying to jump in and on any of this, but I just had this thought. Have any of you ever thought of reading in your children's books on YouTube and advertising that way? Because
Yeah, I'm doing that.
we see that audiobooks are so incredible. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, no, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine.
I'm in the process of doing stuff like that right now. Not necessarily for the books I've already published, but uh, I'm for instance putting together a little Dungeons and Dragons animated thing that I'm going to narrate, and I'm also upload some snippets of audiobook stuff because people just kind of like listening to things, even if they're not just focused on you, they just play it, and you're just there in the background while they're doing something. But once again, that's not really marketing to kids necessarily, right? I mean, they might find it, but really advertising on pretty much I think any platform except like Twitch for obvious reasons, and sometimes YouTube just seems more geared towards teenagers and up.
Which is completely understandable.
Right.
On
Well,
on that, go ahead.
I was just saying, I forgot who said it, but just for the sake of everybody being safe, it's probably best you're not advertising directly to kids, and it's better to approach the parents, because either one of two things is going to happen. Either the kids are going to buy it directly, and if the parents don't like it, they're going to get mad at you, or if it goes to the parents, that's the best case scenario because they're vetting it for them.
I also take a look, and this is just a thought. How often have you guys gone to your local libraries and tried to read some of your books aloud? I mean, not necessarily your current ones, but maybe ones that you're planning on promoting to kids, and actually read them in the kids section.
Nobody
They
wants
never
to
got back
read.
to me.
Okay.
I've wanted to.
Okay.
Yeah,
See,
mine's
that-
not yet, so I haven't tried to do that yet.
Yeah.
I get that.
I think it's a time thing too. I actually have a pretty receptive library district in my area, but I haven't taken advantage of it because it's cutting into time that I feel like I should be writing just because I need a bigger backlog anyway. So that's stuff that I would love to do and really hope to do sometime, but it's definitely a back burner type of thing just because, I would love to, if I was able to reach just one a person and get one loyal reader out of it, it would be worth it. But at the same time, there's no guarantees of that either. And that's a lot of time commitment. And the audiobook is a lot of work too, recording and stuff, the editing, and it ends up being a lot longer than a person would think.
Of course. And on that same note, James Smith, if he was asking, how do you go about picking a narrator for a child's book?
I'm going to skip this question. You guys handle this.
I actually don't have narrators for my books, my kids' books anyway. So I'm going to also pass on that.
Yeah, I don't know. For
Do they mean
like,
audio
middle grade.
narrator? Like,
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know if audio is really big for middle grade. Like neither one of my
Yeah.
daughters will listen to a book. They might do one of those read-alongs where you can
Go ask
hear
the
it
kid.
and read at the same time and somebody's speaking, but it's not the same as like audiobooks for the adult stuff.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious how this is going to work because my series is Lit RPG for kids, which on my app I constantly get, is there any Lit RPG for kids? So my hope is that the big first wave of quote advertising is going to be in the various Lit RPG groups and Game Lit Society and all those, and hopefully all these parents have really been asking, I want to get my kid in it. Hopefully they actually are really there and they buy these for their kids. So I have Andrea Parsnos set up to do this, mostly because I like to work on the Wandering Inn. I don't know if kids are going to love it, but I figure maybe Andrea Parsnos fans will at least like it enough to earn me my money back, and then we'll see what happens after that. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen with it. I'm just excited to be working with her and hoping that it does something.
She is amazing. Andrea just knocks it out of the park.
Yeah.
for the audiobook, I want to put it in quick. Actually, my son, Dean, he has an audiobook that he wrote for other 10-year-olds that went through Sound Booth Theater. So kind of a plug for him. since he's not here. That's Spider Nightmare Apocalypse. So I'll look it up.
No, I don't think I will.
It's been on my older daughter's shelf. It hasn't been read yet, but it's there. They just haven't read it yet.
It's a lot of fun. It's actually my favorite of his. He has his second one, Trapped in Roblox. And that one, I don't know all of the stuff that's going on there. Like, I don't know enough about Roblox, I guess. But Spider Nightmare Apocalypse, pure imagination, wonderful, love it. Yeah. So, at stores near you.
Okay. Steve Campbell, who writes in, is making action in kids' books more age appropriate, just simply a matter of the level of graphic description.
I would say yes, but also no, because you could. I think it wouldn't be hard to write a pretty long, detailed fight scene that wasn't necessarily graphic, but certainly violent just by the nature of the action. But I think that the difference there is that you need to be able to retain a child's very short attention span. Right? They can't imagine necessarily a complex kung fu heavy fight, right?
Right.
Well, I say right. I don't know. I haven't gone up to a kid recently and said, "Hey, can you imagine Bruce Lee fighting Chuck Norris for a moment?" But it's like you throw.
There's always a chance for first.
You have to keep the fight simple in description, but still complex enough to sort of drive home the severity of the violence. I think because you're not. Every time I break off, it's because I'm trying to put in these probablys or likes in there. You're not going to put a fight in just to have a fight. A fight is in a book to help move the plot along, or to start the plot, or to serve some integral part of the story, if not the MacGuffin to begin with, right? So I think the challenge there is keeping it quick and simple to keep the reader's attention, but not also so boring and complex that it's over in a couple of paragraphs. That doesn't drive home the severity of what's going on.
Yeah, I think looking at like Harry Potter and like the Order of the Phoenix, when they had those big wizard battles at the end, there's a lot of when that first came out, there's a lot of criticism from people because it was very flashy and quick, and it wasn't necessarily the same as the books, but it works for the kids' attention span. Going back to what Jeffrey said, it's very flashy, quick. You don't get into the nitty gritty details as much. Reading like Salvatore's fights with Dritz all the time. Those are like pages long of fights that he moved his hand this way, he swung this way. You don't necessarily need to get into the nitty gritty. That's more about the flash than it is the depth, I guess. It's still deep, but it's not as deep.
And I'd agree with that too, Troy. I think one of the reasons why I absolutely agree, like the longer the fight scenes and the more complex, like you might lose them. I think the reason the longer fight scenes like in the Order of the Phoenix work is because she gives it room to breathe. That entire fight scene is like over the course of maybe a chapter or two, a long chapter, but there's sequences of intense action broken up by character interaction and just cool stuff happening where they're set. That's going to keep the kids' attention span rather than just endless fighting, a deluge of fighting. And so she was very smart about pacing it. And so I think you can have, obviously that's a older, middle grade or YA book. So that's a little bit different than like for kids' books. But if you want to have kind of the scenes, just kind of pace it and keep the interest.
Yeah, I think if you're going to do, like, for the skew it younger books, like mine is, make them kind of funny fight scenes. Because, like, this series was originally, like I said, supposed to be a cartoon, so it has that whole feel of it. So the villains are very mwahaha. Kind of, they're all idiots, basically. Like, the smart ones, like, are the kids figuring out, and they're like, well, how has this idiot gotten to the point where he's actually threatening the world in this scene?
Bullets, my one weakness.
My co-writer, when we used to joke that he would always like try to put in a goofy like, he can't affect yellow, and I'm like, no, we're not doing it.
Oh, it's a Green Lantern.
That made no sense. Yeah, that made no sense in the 1930s, much less now. Unless it's like, so I'm like, well, just make it their personality. They're like with the goofy. It's almost like the coyote in Roadrunner. He's like, what he's gonna do to himself every time, and just to laugh. So it's like take their weakness and make it the point of their downfall. The kid character just has to figure out what that is and how to manipulate it. And I find that you can keep the attention in these fight scenes longer if you have funny bits. Because I think after a while, the kids will get bored of just the action. They're just like, well, I need to laugh every once in a while. So you just make the fight scene stupid, I guess is my point.
Yeah, for me, mine was post-apocalyptic and kind of reality-based, like very immersive. But I made a point of I didn't get into the gore in blood, and I thought about what would be appropriate if my daughter was watching this on a screen, and that descriptive level. But yeah, originally I was actually thinking about having them explode into coins or something to get away from that. And I was like, no, that's not going to work at all for my story. But I made a point of my protagonist talking about how the impact, of the violence in the video games, how it's impacting them, and how it's not like playing a game anymore. It's like it's different when it feels real.
Mhm.
And so I think I think it is important to touch on the morals, because it's okay to have morally ambiguous characters, but when you're talking about something that's kid friendly, that is something that that you'll see as a common theme, is that their characters get what's coming to them, whether it's they get rewarded for good things or they get punished for bad things. And I think that that might be a little bit more important in the younger ages.
Mhm. Okay. So this just came to me, because we all have our favorite series. But what are some ways that you have taken in things from your favorite series and helped to adapt them so that a child would understand them or it would be interesting for them?
I think sharing anything. My daughter and I took advantage of that last Audible sale and got the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, the Andy Serkis read ones. They're $5, and man, this is blast listening to the Hobbit with her. And now we have the Lord of the Rings lined up. And so I think just sharing it, and when you're talking about adapting, I haven't done that necessarily. I had to change some of the way I wrote when I was writing it, but I think that you really have to be in touch with that age group. So that would be the main thing, is just making sure that you are staying in touch, because listening to The Hobbit is interesting because my daughter's perceiving it in a much different way than I did when I first read it, and so it's just interesting to hear her perspective on things.
So, how are any of you guys familiar with the Magic of Xanth series?
Yep.
So
No.
that and Harry Potter were sort of the books my dad read to my brother and I, like the bedtime stories. Except I didn't know this, right? He would censor the Magic of Xanth in certain parts, even though that whole series wasn't exactly graphic to begin with. But it certainly was suggestive.
There's some parts, yeah.
Right. But it's you brought up Lord of the Rings earlier, and I think of the animated Lord of the Rings movies, right? And I think, well, these are adult books, right? But kids can watch this, right? The only real bad thing is the violence, right? So then that's sort of what level of violence is bad, I suppose. So it really just kind of depends on taking what you like from the stories that make you happy and just just leave out the bits that are not necessarily appropriate for kids, but also don't really have an effect on the story one way or the other if they're there or not. We talked about swearing earlier. If you took out all the swears from a Space Marine book, would they still be, tough badasses? Yeah, but you can hear them say funny things like giggle drop instead of, something else. And the kids would just giggle at that.
I think a lot also has to do with the perspective, because you can really have some pretty intense stuff from a child's perspective. I remember one book was The Giver. That was a required reading in my school. I mean, they straight up murder a baby in that. And there's a lot of very dark stuff, but because Lois Lowry wrote it from a kid's perspective, it's done as he would be able to understand it. And I think she did it's a balance. And so, yeah, I don't know where that line is as far, obviously there are like hard lines of graphic sex and violence and that sort of things. But like Jeffrey was saying about like the Lord of the Rings, I mean, there's some pretty big stuff in there too, but I think the way that book was written, and it's been a while since I've read it, but it's done in a way where it's not the same graphic level as nowadays. So you'd have to kind of approach it from a little bit of a different way. But handled correctly, you can definitely kind of adapt some of your favorite things for younger readers.
Okay. We had a question from Irene on Facebook. I remember high interest, low vocabulary books. Are you concerned with reading levels and vocabulary?
I have, in my book, actually I had to deal with this issue. Like, I kind of feel a little passionate about the idea of not writing down the kids. So, I mean, there are times when I will choose a word and then realize, well, that really doesn't work. But with this, I've figured out a way to kind of make a joke out of it. Like the 8-year-old character who didn't even really exist when I first started writing the book, he sort of invented himself because I wanted more of a comedic relief pain in the butt for the main hero girl. At one point, he says something about "you'll face my wrath," and then I put a little notification thing that defines wrath because she says, "Where did he hear that word?" And then later on, when he's captured by the bad guy, he says something ergo, and he's like, and the bad guy actually says, "Where did you hear that word? You're way too young for that word." And he explains that he saw it. Not only did he explain how he heard it in a movie, but basically his dialogue explains what the word means, so that ergo I know what this word means. So I kind of almost do the opposite. There's like times when words that are definitely probably not age appropriate, and I mean they're not swears or anything like that. They're just maybe more advanced words. I try to find a funny way to bring the context so that the kids can understand it. Or I just actually define it like I did with wrath because I thought it was amusing.
I think that's very clever. I don't go out of my way. I'm not going to try to put in big words to like teach, but I'm going to write, I'm not going to dumb it down either. When I was reading books as a kid, if I came across a word I didn't understand, either A, I would learn it through the context, or B, I would look it up. And I think that even if you don't understand it, you can get kind of like what the sentence is saying. And then if you see that enough times, and you read enough books that kind of have that higher vocabulary, I think it's good to challenge a little bit. Not in a way that makes the story unreadable to them, but in a way that's like, all right, well, we're gonna push you a little bit, but you'll still understand it.
Yeah,
and for me, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, instead of
Okay.
like everybody saying I'm dumbing down, I do try to write less complex sentences so that the thought of the sentence is more digestible in smaller chunks than like my more adult stuff. There's a lot that goes on in a single sentence. I use a lot of commas. So I try to cut that back down so it's a little bit easier just to digest what's going on with each segment.
I do want to real quick clarify. I'm sorry, James. I want to clarify. I think there's a wide range also of like what's considered kids. So there's like children's books to chapter books to like upper middle grade, and I think that is there's a very different. So like what Troy was saying, there's a very good reason to write simpler sentences for like younger books and vice versa. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The sentences definitely get shorter the younger you're going. I know with my series, what I did for the first two books, I didn't do this for the third because I wanted him to read it as a surprise. But the first two books, I had my son read them before I ever went close to publishing them, and he went through, and if he understood a chapter, it was good to go. Like if he enjoyed it and he understood it, boom, done. And that's kind of how I vetted those books, right? They're made for 10-year-olds. He was 10 years old. Boom, that's how it works. I didn't sit down and actively think about like, okay, I need to not use these words and I can only use these words. I definitely didn't do that.
I mean, when we say this question, the greatest example that comes to me is the Wheel of Time, and I still cannot get into those books because it's so complex of a story, not necessarily just the whole story, but just sentence by sentence. It's almost poetic in a way. That's asking you to read between the lines. It's I don't know. I just like, this is making my mind work too much to make the picture in my head, in a sense, which is funny because as an author, that's literally where I live these days. But I think it's the difference in like I think back to like the Bernstein Bears was kind of one of the big kids books when I was a kid, and there was the one book where sister had a fight with her friend, and it was kind of, they had a fight. It was like just the sentence in a way, right? There was a whole setup, and then there was the resolution, but it's kind of like just one sentence, they had a fight. Where as an adult, you could just explain, right, in like paragraphs or pages or chapters, as we were talking about earlier in the other stuff, what that fight entails, or the consequences, or the reasons, or the background. But for kids, all they kind of just need to make the picture in their head is a stick figure. They don't need the meat on the bones, like my English teacher used to say.
Absolutely. So we had a good question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just got to wake up my son.
Yeah, you're good. And we'll catch you in a minute, James. So we had a good question from Facebook. What do you think about how middle reader books have changed over the years, like Goosebumps to Captain Underpants to now?
I wouldn't call those young adult necessarily.
I would say middle reader or books.
I would say that it's kind of like the complexity of the story has kind of just sort of gone down a little bit. I don't literally mean like it's gotten worse. I sort of mean in the same sense that what was a college course 20, 30 years ago is now taught in high school, right? The average younger person is now able to understand more because they have a greater access to the wider world and learning and understanding of ideas, for better or for worse. Mm-hmm. Definitely more leaning for worse when it comes to the internet, of course. But the books that you could read in a high school library back when I had high school like 10 years ago at this point. Excuse me, I'm getting old. I apologize. I see them in middle schools. The couple of times I've gone by to volunteer and help out. So I really kind of feel like that's a benefit, as opposed to like Captain Underpants is still appreciated also by high schoolers, even if they don't, they won't appreciate it as much as if they were younger. I get a giggle out of that, but not Goosebumps. I don't read that.
I do think before, Harry Potter really broke out the young reader
Oh
category.
yeah.
And before that, though, I think part of why there was a lot more complexity in like kids' books was there were books that weren't, the adults were just writing them, but there wasn't as clearly defined of what are kids going to be reading, what's too much or too little for them. Then you have Harry Potter that kind of created that whole genre really pushed it forward. I do somewhat agree that they are going down. Some are going down in complexity, but I also think that there are still many ones that are just as good now. And things like Captain America and Goosebumps, they get ostracized a lot, but they do get kids reading. And there are also, I'm of the mind like my parents hated Captain Underpants. They still hate Captain Underpants. They never let me read it, but it got kids reading. And I'm always of the mind like if they're reading, it doesn't matter what they're reading, because a kid who loves reading will eventually find other things. They're not going to just stay on Captain Underpants forever.
Mhm.
And I think that even nowadays there's books that are funny and light like that, and then there's always books that are really pushing the boundaries. And I mean, you go look at the Newbery Honor winners that are just complex and deep
Oh
stories.
yeah.
So they're absolutely there. It's just maybe they're a bit harder to find, or maybe it could be they're just more streamlined than they were back when we were reading them. Or age appropriate.
I think that there's plenty out there too that you have your fantasy series. I know more about the like strictly fantasy because that's what my daughter's into. But there's Rick Riordan with his Trials of Apollo series. I've read that with my daughter. That's very complex if you read that, and he's constantly referencing things that's only a parent would get. Tiny Tim, I mean, would tell me I barely recognize who Tiny Tim is, and different musical artists, and so he's not afraid to. But then, and I think that that's important. That it's okay if people. I mean, I certainly don't. I miss references. I miss different things, or when I'm reading a book, and as long as your prose is good enough to where people can, that it can continue to flow, that it doesn't stop them dead in place and say, hold on, I can't continue if I don't know who Tiny Tim is. It's like, you can, so you obviously your prose has to be good enough to where you can slip in that stuff and it's not going to just stop a reader dead. And it, as long as it's, not integral to the story, obviously. But there's the warriors and the animorphs that they have these, they're definitely made for these middle grade age, but they also really tackle some, I think that prose wise and vocabulary wise, I don't think that they're really cutting back much, or it doesn't seem that what I've read of it. I don't feel like there's definitely areas where, the kids, like my daughter's very well read, so there's that niche. A well-read fantasy lover who's gonna know that you don't have to worry about it. So it's all about finding your niche, I think. And once you find that niche, these authors that have made it big, they found their niche and they get right to it, and they're doing great. I haven't, but good for them.
I will also add the warriors and the animorphs are really complex and surprisingly dark for young readers. I remember that.
My stepdaughter's obsessed with that. Yeah, I mean, I think also when I was a kid, I don't know, I'm going to be 51 in 3 weeks. They didn't have middle grade really.
Yep.
Like they didn't know what it was. I mean, like now you'll see Ender's Game in the middle grade, and a special different version that's strangely cheaper than the other one, but whatever. But I don't think Orson Scott Card went and wrote that and said, "Oh, this is for 8 to 12-year-olds." He wrote a book for whoever was going to read it about a kid that was younger. So, I mean, I was reading stuff probably at a younger age that was really appropriate. Like, I'm surprised my mom let me buy, like, Princess of Mars, half naked, what's her name on the cover. But, so there was that. For me, I think one of the reasons a lot of kids maybe didn't read as much as our generation was because there was that gap of stuff that was, quote, appropriate for their age. Yeah. Now, I mean, so many publishing companies cater to that, like Rick Riordan. I mean, obviously Harry Potter, those things are blockbusters.
Yeah.
You reminded me that Brandon Sanderson's, I don't think but his company re-released the Mistborn trilogy in the young adult section.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the? This is actually cool. What is this? And I actually did research. And I was like,
Wait a
why
minute.
is this here?
Well, it's like Chris was saying, is when I was a kid, I was, for comic books, I was reading the Avengers. And it was the same Avengers that the adults were reading because they didn't have the younger version like they have nowadays. Like you see it, well, I forget what it's called, but you see the kidified versions. And they do kidified stories. I was reading the same stuff that the adults were reading back then, when at 8 or 9, because that's just what was available. There wasn't this whole thing of middle grade, YA. It was just fantasy. I read The Hobbit,
so
and Lord of the Rings was probably like 8,
boys.
9, or 10 or something when I first read it. Because that's what was available. There wasn't this whole other level, which if there had been, there probably would have been a lot more people reading it because it was a lot more, would be more accessible.
I think there was a Choose Your Own Adventure fantasy series with D&D.
Yep,
And then there
there
was Lone Wolf, right?
Yep, Lone Wolf.
Gray Star.
Yeah.
And
But I don't know if I'd call those kid books though at the time.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to remember. Like, how old were those? Were those like YA?
I read those when I was in 4th grade, I think.
Yeah,
Fourth
so
grade
later
when I was reading
elementary.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's about it. Yeah, almost everything was written either like you're very young and you don't know words, or you're an adult.
There's no in between. We just evolve, metamorphosize into an adult.
Yep, cocoon and out. There you go.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that for better or for worse that that's happened to our society? I wonder.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question.
I think
Is
whatever
it-
gets the kids reading,
Yeah.
if kids are turned off of reading because the words, they're just, their brains aren't there to really to soak up that. I mean, there's stuff I read. I read Cyberpunk, and talk about a headache. Sometimes I'm like, what? Like what is happening here? And I'm sure everybody has encountered those books people recommend to them, and they start reading, and they're like, am I an idiot? Because I'm not getting this. This prose isn't working with me. So I think whatever's getting them to overcome that challenge and to continue to read is a successful book. And I think it's, I'm very appreciative of those people who wrote, that stuff that, like the Hobbit or C.S. Lewis with Narnia, and, that they were friendly enough. The prose was, it's very lyrical. Their prose was very lyrical. So I feel like anybody can pick it up and read it.
Oh, absolutely.
Versus, some other stuff is just a lot harder. And like some kids their minds aren't going to be able to comprehend. And if they can't get past the first couple sentences in a book, that's as far as they'll go.
True. All right. This has been a wonderful panel, and the discussion has been incredible. And we only have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to continue to introduce anything that is coming up. Like we want to know what things you guys have in store for us, for kids and for the adults.
Start at the opposite end this time.
Yeah, I was going to do the same thing for Chris. Like, I could start with him.
Like I said, this is coming out soonish. Where the hell? One of my plans for it is to actually try to just give away a bunch of ebook copies of it, just to spread the word, because we're planning to kickstart the first trilogy. Not sure how that's going to go for a kid series, but we're going to give it a go.
I've backed a couple of Kickstarter kid series stuff.
What do you say?
I've backed a couple Kickstarters.
So have I. So I think
Again,
there's
marketing
definitely
to the adults.
Oh yeah, it's
so my
great.
hope is to get out the word. And
Exactly.
but cmcarneywrites.com is my website, and you can find me CM Carney on Amazon as well as on Facebook. Is currently where I'm most active. That'll probably change because kids don't use Facebook. But yeah, so it's been great, guys.
All right, let's pop to Sean.
So all of my YA stuff, which is good for adults and teens, I would say, even younger teens, that you can find all of that on Amazon and ebook, paperback, and a couple series are in audiobook. And then as far as my middle grade, like I said, that the latest one is currently out at Agents. So fingers crossed, if I'm lucky, maybe you'll see it in a year or so, or whether or not I decide to self-publish it or get it with a publisher.
All right, let's pop to Dames.
All right. Yeah, the Fairy Knights books. I grabbed all 4 of them here because, yeah, well, however you do that.
I will look them up and I will link them in the Discord, or so that
Nice.
if we want to continue this, we can afterwards.
Yep. Well, the plan now, actually, my illustrator, he's another university professor at a different university, and that one is closing down. So he is stopping with animation for a while, kind of switching over to a new main profession. In the meantime, we are going to put everything together into one big volume and put that out. So save some money. It's illustrated. It's a fun series. Take a look at it.
All right, Troy, you're up.
All right. Well, I got the first middle grade, a little older. I'm targeting probably like 9, 10. Is the Wild Rose Sprite, and the first book's the Greenstone. And I'm shooting for, this is the proof copy, which I have a bunch of changes to. So I'm shooting for the first week of December. This will be out, and I'm hoping to get the next 2 books out a couple months after that. And then this one's not Lit RPG game lit, but the following stuff that we'll hopefully start on in a couple months will be. So you'll better find it. Hopefully, better get this on Amazon and everywhere else. I'm gonna go wide with it, and you can find out everything on my website, which is Ozzy Writes, OSSYWRITES, and that's got everything.
All right, we basically have to end this, so we're gonna let Jamie go, and we'll leave any extra questions for Jeff in the Discord. I apologize.
Jeff, you got a picture? Flash your book while I'm flashing mine on here. This is my newest book.
My boy.
And you can go to jdjorson.com to check out any of my stuff.
Yeah.
All right,
Don't
thank
worry
you guys
about me.
so much. This was a fun panel.
Hey, thank you, RJ.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you.
See you guys.